The unexpected diplomat. Captain Elena Korvash had piloted cargo freighters through asteroid fields, navigated radiation storms near dying stars, and once talked her way out of a pirate blockade using nothing but charm and a broken plasma cutter. None of that had prepared her for this moment. She stood in the docking bay of the Zephyrian Imperial Station, staring at the formal diplomatic uniform someone had thrust into her hands 30 minutes ago, wondering how her life had taken such a catastrophic turn. The uniform was too large. It belonged to Ambassador Chin, who was currently unconscious in the medical bay along with every other member of Earth's diplomatic corps. Some kind of virus, the doctors said, something that targeted humans specifically but left other species untouched. Convenient timing, Elena thought, given that humanity's most important diplomatic meeting in a century was scheduled to begin in less than an hour. "You're the only human on this station who isn't sick," Director Matthias had told her, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "You have to stand in." "I transport grain and mining equipment," Elena had protested. "I don't do politics." "You negotiate contracts, don't you? You deal with port authorities, customs officials, shipping magnates." "It's the same thing." "It's absolutely not the same thing." But here she was anyway, because when your species is the newest member of the Galactic Council and you're trying to prove you belong among civilizations that have been sailing the stars for millennia, you don't skip meetings with the Empress of the Zephyrian Dominion. You send whoever you have, even if that person is a cargo pilot who smells faintly of engine coolant and whose diplomatic training consists of watching a 10-minute instructional video while getting dressed. Elena pulled on the uniform. It hung loose on her frame, making her look like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. She caught her reflection in a polished metal panel and grimaced. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her face showing the permanent slight tan of someone who spent too much time under the UV lighting of cargo holds. She looked exactly like what she was, someone out of her depth and aware of it. Her communicator buzzed. A message from her co-pilot and best friend, James, who was still aboard their ship. "You've got this, Captain. Just remember, aliens put their pants on one leg at a time. Well, the ones with legs. And pants." Elena smiled despite herself. "Thanks, James. That's exactly the confidence boost I needed. Seriously though, you've negotiated with the Torgathi merchant princes. If you can handle them, you can handle anyone. The Torgathi respect money. I understand money. I don't understand ancient alien empires with customs that predate human civilization. Then don't try to understand. Just be yourself. That's gotten you this far." Elena wasn't sure how far that actually was, but she appreciated the sentiment. She took a deep breath, straightened the too large uniform as best she could, and stepped out of the dressing room into the corridor where her escort was waiting. The Zephyrian guard was tall and elegant, his crystalline skin refracting light in subtle rainbow patterns. His species had mastered faster-than-light travel when humans were still figuring out agriculture. His civilization had built wonders that humanity could barely comprehend. And right now he was looking at Elena with something that might have been pity. "Captain Korvash," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality typical of Zephyrians. "I am Sentinel Theron. I will escort you to the throne room." "About that," Elena said, falling into step beside him as they walked through corridors that seemed carved from liquid starlight. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" The briefing video wasn't very specific. "Stand in the designated position. Do not speak unless addressed directly by the Empress. Do not make direct eye contact for more than 3 seconds at a time. Do not touch anything. Do not." "This is a lot of do nots," Elena interrupted. "What can I do?" Theron considered this. "Brief. Stand. Exist quietly. So basically, be furniture. Furniture that represents your entire species to the most powerful sovereign in this sector of the galaxy, yes." Elena felt her stomach twist into knots. No pressure then. They walked in silence through halls that defied human architectural understanding. Walls curved in ways that seemed impossible, flowing from floor to ceiling without seams or joints. Light emanated from everywhere and nowhere, creating an ambient glow that made everything look simultaneously real and dreamlike. Other beings moved through the corridors, representatives of dozens of species, all heading toward the throne room for the same ceremonial gathering. Elena recognized a few from her years of freight hauling. The Korthan delegation with their multiple arms and bioluminescent markings. The Vrel ambassador, whose species looked like someone had given sentience to a geometric theorem. The humans were supposed to be here too, but instead they had sent Elena, and she could feel the curious stares from other delegates as they passed. "Here," Theron said, stopping before a massive doorway that seemed to be constructed from solidified void, black and absolute, yet somehow still reflecting light in strange patterns. When the doors open, proceed directly to the marker designated for the Terran Alliance. It will be on the floor, blue light in the shape of your planet's primary continent configuration. Stand there. Do not move unless instructed otherwise. And if something goes wrong, try not to start an interstellar war. That's reassuring. Theron's expression might have been a smile. In my 3 centuries of service, I have seen only 2 genuine diplomatic incidents. Both involved species far more aggressive than yours. You will be fine, Captain. Probably. The probably was not reassuring. The doors began to open, moving with impossible silence despite their obvious mass. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She had faced down cargo thieves, navigated through systems where one wrong move meant death by vacuum exposure, and survived 3 different engine failures in deep space. But none of that had made her feel as vulnerable as this moment, walking into a room full of beings who could end human civilization with a word. The throne room opened before her like a cathedral built by a civilization that understood dimensions humans couldn't perceive. The space was vast and vertical, stretching upward into heights that made Elena's eyes hurt when she tried to focus on them. Columns rose like frozen music, their surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. Light filtered through the space in colors that didn't quite exist in Earth's spectrum, creating an atmosphere that was both beautiful and deeply alien. The other delegates were already in position, arranged in a careful semicircle before a raised platform at the far end of the chamber. Elena could see dozens of species, some familiar, most not. All of them stood with perfect posture, radiating the kind of confidence that came from centuries or millennia of diplomatic tradition. Elena started walking, her footsteps echoing in the vast space despite her best efforts to move quietly. She found her marker easily enough, a blue glow on the floor that did indeed show the rough shape of Earth's continents. She positioned herself on it, turned to face the platform, and for the first time got a clear look at the throne itself. It was constructed from something that looked like crystallized time, layers of translucent material stacked in impossible configurations. And seated upon it was Empress Valuria of the Zephyrian Dominion, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. The Empress was magnificent in a way that transcended simple beauty. She was tall, easily 3 meters, with the characteristic crystalline skin of her people, but hers seemed to contain entire galaxies, swirling patterns of light and color that moved beneath the surface like living nebulae. Her robes appeared to be woven from pure starlight, shifting through colors that had no names in human language. Her face was angular and elegant, with large eyes that held depths Elena couldn't fathom. Those eyes swept across the assembled delegates with the assessment of someone who had ruled for 5 centuries and seen empires rise and fall. Elena forced herself to look down after 2 seconds, remembering Theron's warning about eye contact. Then something strange happened. Elena felt it before she saw it. A sensation that started in her chest and spread outward, like recognition without memory, like déjà vu but stronger, more certain. Her hands tingled. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Every instinct she had developed over years of danger screamed that something significant was happening, but she couldn't identify what. She looked up, forgetting the 3-second rule. The Empress had gone absolutely still. Not the composed stillness of royalty maintaining dignity, but the frozen shock of someone seeing something impossible. Her crystalline skin, which had been flowing with color, suddenly paled, the light within dimming as if someone had turned down the sun. Her eyes, those vast galactic eyes, were fixed on Elena with an intensity that made everything else in the room disappear. Elena watched in growing alarm as the Empress's breathing changed, becoming rapid and shallow. Her hands, which had been resting gracefully on the arms of her throne, suddenly gripped the material hard enough that tiny fractures appeared in the crystallized surface. The sound echoed through the silent chamber like breaking glass. Then the Empress shuddered. It was a full-body tremor that lasted several seconds, her entire frame shaking as if she'd been struck by lightning. The light within her crystalline skin flared and dimmed in rapid succession, creating a strobe effect that cast strange shadows across the throne room. The assembled delegates reacted with shock. Elena heard gasps, sharp intakes of breath, the rustle of various forms of formal attire as being shifted uncomfortably. Clearly this was not normal protocol. This was not how an empress who had ruled for half a millennium was supposed to behave during formal ceremonies. The Empress's guards moved immediately, their hands going to weapons that looked ceremonial but were certainly functional. 8 Zephyrian warriors in armor that seemed to be made from the same crystallized time as the throne itself, all of them suddenly on high alert, all of them looking for the threat that had caused their sovereign to react with such visible shock. Elena stood frozen in her designated spot, her mind racing through possibilities. Had she violated some protocol she didn't know about? Was there something offensive about her appearance? Her uniform? The way she was standing? Had humans somehow insulted the Zephyrians without realizing it? But the strange certainty in her chest said otherwise. This wasn't about protocol or insult. This was something else entirely, something deeper and more fundamental. Something that had to do with that feeling of recognition, that sense of impossible familiarity with someone she had never met. The Empress's closest advisor, an ancient Zephyrian whose crystalline skin had dulled to a pale frost color with age, moved to her side immediately. He spoke in rapid Zephyrian, too fast and too quiet for Elena's translator implant to catch. The Empress didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes remained locked on Elena with an expression that combined shock, confusion, wonder, and something that looked disturbingly like fear. The silence in the throne room was absolute. 200 beings from across the galaxy held their breath, watching their host, one of the most powerful sovereigns in known space, react to something with a loss of composure that most of them would have thought impossible. Elena wanted desperately to look away, to break the eye contact that was clearly making this situation worse. But something about the Empress's gaze held her frozen. Those galactic eyes were searching her face, examining every feature as if trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The tension in the room built until it felt like a physical presence, pressing down on everyone assembled. Elena could see other delegates glancing at each other, confusion evident despite the variety of alien features. Whatever was happening, it wasn't in anyone's briefing materials. Finally the Empress moved. She stood, the motion slow and deliberate, as if she was testing whether her legs would support her. The movement triggered another wave of reaction through the assembled delegates. Apparently standing during this part of the ceremony was not normal. Elena's limited diplomatic knowledge was enough to know that when royalty deviated from established protocol, something significant was happening. The ancient advisor spoke again, more urgently this time. The Empress raised one hand in a gesture that silenced him instantly. The authority in that simple movement was absolute, the kind of power that came from centuries of unquestioned rule. "You," the Empress said, and her voice carried across the vast chamber with perfect clarity despite not being particularly loud. She was speaking universal standard, the common language of the Galactic Council, which was interesting. Protocol suggested she should be speaking Zephyrian with translation provided. The single word hung in the air like a question and an accusation combined. Elena's throat was dry. "Your Majesty?" she managed, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "Step forward." Elena glanced desperately at where Sentinel Theron stood in the honor guard formation. He made a subtle gesture with one hand that she interpreted as meaning she should do exactly what the Empress commanded and hope for the best. Elena walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. She stopped at the base of the platform because climbing the steps without explicit permission seemed like an excellent way to get shot by the increasingly nervous-looking guards. Up close, the Empress's reaction was even more visible. She was trembling, not dramatically but enough to see. The light within her crystalline skin flickered and pulsed in patterns that Elena's implant database suggested indicated extreme emotional distress. Her breathing remained unsteady, her chest rising and falling in irregular rhythms. "Your name," the Empress said, and it wasn't quite a question, more like a demand for confirmation of something she already suspected but didn't want to believe. "Captain Elena Corvash, Your Majesty. Terran Cargo Fleet. I'm temporarily representing humanity because Ambassador Chen and his entire team are ill. I apologize if I've violated any protocol. I had very limited briefing time and—" "Elena Corvash," the Empress repeated, testing the sounds like they might reveal hidden meaning. She descended 3 steps, closing the distance between them until she was close enough that Elena could see the swirling patterns within those galactic eyes shift and change like storm systems on a living planet. "Before your current position," the Empress said quietly, but in the silent chamber her words carried to every corner, "your family history. Your genetic lineage. Tell me." This was getting increasingly strange. Elena glanced around the chamber again, but the other delegates were watching with the kind of fascination usually reserved for disasters. Awful but impossible to look away from. "I'm from Earth, Your Majesty. European sector originally. My family's not particularly notable. My mother was a hydroponics engineer. My father taught astrophysics. My grandmother was a cargo pilot like me. Standard human lineage as far as I know. Nothing special." "Nothing special," the Empress repeated, and something in her voice made it sound like she was tasting the words and finding them false. She took another step down, now on the same level as Elena. The height difference between their species was obvious. The Empress towered over her by nearly a meter. "You feel it," the Empress said, and it wasn't a question. "The resonance. The echo. You must feel it." Elena did feel something. That strange sensation that had started when she entered the throne room and intensified with every passing moment. Like recognition without memory, certainty without knowledge, familiarity with someone she'd never met. But admitting that seemed like opening a door to complications she couldn't begin to understand. "I'm not sure what I'm feeling, Your Majesty," Elena said honestly, because lying to someone who was clearly experiencing some kind of profound reaction seemed counterproductive and possibly dangerous. The Empress reached out one hand, stopped halfway, clearly struggling with some internal debate. Her advisor said something sharp in Zephyrian, probably warning her not to touch the unknown alien, but she ignored him with the casual dismissal that suggested 5 centuries of ruling meant she didn't have to listen to advice she disagreed with. 500 years ago, the Empress said, and her voice took on the quality of someone reciting from carefully preserved memory, "Our homeworld suffered a cataclysm. A meteor strike that should have been detected, should have been prevented, but wasn't. It impacted near the capital city. The devastation was total. Fires, earthquakes, tsunamis. Millions died within hours." Elena listened, confused about where this was going but certain it was important. The other delegates were equally confused, murmuring among themselves in dozens of languages that created a symphony of bewilderment. "I was in the palace," the Empress continued. 20 cycles old, barely an adult by our standards. The first daughter of the previous Empress, training to eventually take the throne. When the meteor struck, the shockwave reached us within minutes. The palace, a structure that had stood for 10,000 years, began to collapse. Her crystalline skin flickered with light patterns that Elena's database suggested meant remembering pain. "I was trapped under debris. Fire spreading. Air running out. The security protocols said rescue would take days. I had hours at most. I knew I was going to die." The throne room was so silent that Elena could hear her own heartbeat, unnaturally loud in her ears. She had no idea why the Empress was telling her this, but every instinct said to stay quiet and listen. "Then someone came," the Empress said softly. "Through fire and falling rubble. Through impossible conditions. They wore some kind of protective suit I didn't recognize. Technology that wasn't Zephyrian. They pulled me free. Carried me to safety. Stayed with me until rescue teams arrived. Then vanished before I could see their face or understand who they were." She looked at Elena with an intensity that felt like being examined at the molecular level. "The being who saved me asked for nothing. Expected nothing. Pulled me from certain death and disappeared without explanation. I was in shock, injured, barely conscious. By the time I recovered enough to ask questions, they were gone. No trace. No record. No explanation." Her hand completed the gesture she'd started, resting lightly on Elena's shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through Elena's system, not painful but intense, like completing a circuit that had been incomplete her entire life without her knowing it was missing a connection. "I have spent 5 centuries wondering," the Empress said. "Who saved me? Why they helped? What motivated someone to risk everything for a stranger?" My advisors dismissed it as trauma-induced hallucination. Said I must have imagined it in my injured state. Suggested it was metaphor or symbolic vision. Her expression shifted into something that might have been wonder or grief or both. But I knew it was real. I felt them. Their presence. Their emotional signature. The way they felt calm and certain and protective when everything else was terror and death. She looked at Elena with eyes that held galaxies and centuries of memory. "And now you stand before me and I feel it again. That same impossible calm. That same emotional resonance. That same presence that saved my life half a millennium ago." The Empress's voice dropped to barely more than a whisper, but every being in that vast throne room heard it clearly. "Tell me, Captain Elena Corvash of Earth. Tell me how a human who wasn't supposed to exist yet, from a species that hadn't achieved space flight, saved the life of the Zephyrian Empress 500 years before your people ever left your home world." Elena's mind went blank. She stared at the Empress, at those galactic eyes that held absolute certainty about something that was completely impossible. Around them, the throne room erupted in shocked murmurs, delegates speaking rapidly to each other in confusion and disbelief. Because the Empress was right about one thing. 500 years ago, humanity had been firmly bound to Earth, still centuries away from their first crude attempts at interstellar travel. Whatever had happened in that collapsing palace, It couldn't have involved a human. Except the certainty in Elena's chest said otherwise. The recognition that had been building since she entered this room intensified into something undeniable. She did know this woman somehow. She had been there impossibly. The memory was just beyond reach, like trying to remember a dream that faded upon waking. I don't know, Elena said finally honestly. I don't understand any of this. But your majesty. She paused, trying to find words for something that didn't make sense. I feel it too. Like I should know you. Like I've been here before. But that's impossible. Impossible, the Empress agreed. Yet here we stand. And I never forget a presence, Captain Corvash. Never. In 500 years I have met millions of beings. None of them felt like you do. None of them carried that same signature. Until now. She turned to address the assembled delegates, her voice carrying the authority of centuries. This ceremony is postponed. Captain Corvash and I have much to discuss. Sentinel Theron, escort our guest to the private audience chamber. The rest of you return to your quarters. You will be informed when proceedings resume. The delegates began to file out, still murmuring in confusion. Elena stood frozen, her mind trying to process what had just happened. In less than an hour, she had gone from cargo pilot to diplomatic stand-in to the center of an impossible mystery that connected her to an event that happened 500 years before she was born. As Sentinel Theron approached to escort her, Elena caught sight of her reflection in one of the crystalline columns. She looked exactly the same as she had an hour ago. Same face, same ill-fitting uniform, same cargo pilot out of her depth. But the Empress's words echoed in her mind, impossible and undeniable. Somehow, impossibly she had been there. She had saved the life of a sovereign who wouldn't take the throne for centuries. And now she was going to have to figure out how that was possible. The strange certainty in her chest had one answer, impossible as it seemed. This wasn't the first time she had met Empress Valuria. It was the second. And the first meeting had happened 500 years ago. Echoes across time. The private audience chamber was nothing like the vast throne room. It was smaller, more intimate, though still larger than any room Elena had ever been in on a starship. The walls appeared to be made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light, creating patterns that shifted like breathing. Furniture arranged itself in comfortable configurations that seemed to anticipate where people might want to sit. The entire space felt alive, aware, responsive to the presence of those within it. Elena stood near the center of the room, acutely aware that she was alone with one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Sentinel Theron had deposited her here and retreated to stand guard outside. The Empress's ancient advisor had tried to follow them in, but Valuria had dismissed him with a gesture that brooked no argument. Now the Empress stood at a window that overlooked the station, her back to Elena, her crystalline skin still showing those flickering patterns that indicated emotional turbulence. For several long minutes, neither of them spoke. Elena's mind raced through everything she knew about temporal mechanics, which wasn't much. Time travel was theoretical for humans, discussed in academic papers and science fiction, but never achieved. As far as humanity knew, it was impossible. You're afraid, the Empress said finally, not turning from the window. I can senza Italia. Fear mixed with confusion. But underneath that certainty, you feel the truth of what I said even though your rational mind rejects it. Elena chose her words carefully. Your Majesty, I don't doubt what you experienced. But time travel is impossible for humans. We don't have that technology. We've never had it. 500 years ago we barely had computers. We were still fighting wars over resources and territory on our own planet. I know. The Empress turned to face her, and the expression on that alien face was surprisingly gentle. I have studied humanity extensively since you joined the Galactic Council. Your history, your technology, your development timeline. I know what your species was capable of 5 centuries ago. Which is why this mystery has haunted me for so long. She moved to a piece of furniture that reshaped itself into a bench suitable for her height. Sit with me, Captain. Please. I promise you're not in danger. I just need to understand. Elena sat on a chair that formed itself at a height appropriate for humans. The material was warm and surprisingly comfortable, adjusting to her body in ways that suggested it was reading her physical needs somehow. The Empress settled onto her bench with the grace of someone who had performed this simple act millions of times over centuries. Tell me about your grandmother, Valuria said. You mentioned she was a cargo pilot. Yes, Your Majesty. She flew the early colony supply routes. Mars, Europa, the asteroid settlements. She died before I was born, but my father talked about her constantly. She was apparently fearless, took routes other pilots considered too dangerous, always made her deliveries on time. And before that? Her parents? Your great-grandparents? Elena frowned, trying to remember family history that had never seemed particularly important. My great-grandfather was a scientist. He worked in some kind of classified government project in the late 21st century. My father didn't know much about it. Those records were sealed. My great-grandmother raised their children mostly alone because he was always away at some research facility. The Empress leaned forward slightly. What kind of science? I don't know. The few times my father asked, he was told it was classified defense research. Something about quantum mechanics or dimensional physics. It didn't seem relevant to anything, just old family history that nobody talked about much. Quantum mechanics, the Empress repeated softly. Dimensional physics. Captain Corvash, what if I told you that 5 centuries ago humanity did have time travel technology but only briefly and only in secret? Elena stared at her. That's impossible. There would be records. Evidence. You can't hide something like that. You can if it goes catastrophically wrong. The Empress stood and moved to a wall that suddenly displayed what looked like star charts and historical data in formats Elena's translator implant struggled to interpret. 30 years ago, my intelligence services uncovered something interesting. A fragment of data from Earth's information networks, dated to what you would call the year 2087. It was encrypted with methods that shouldn't have existed yet, hidden in layers of deleted files and overwritten storage. We almost missed it entirely. The display shifted, showing what looked like technical schematics. Elena recognized some of the symbols as human mathematical notation, but most of it was beyond her comprehension. It took my best analysts 2 years to decrypt it, Valuria continued. When they did, they found documentation of something called the Corvash Initiative. Named, I believe, after its lead scientist. Elena felt her blood run cold. Corvash. That's... My great-grandfather's name was Richard Corvash. I know. The Empress turned to face her, and those galactic eyes held sympathy now. The Corvash Initiative was a joint military and scientific project attempting to develop practical time travel. According to these fragmentary records, they succeeded. Briefly. The room suddenly felt smaller. Elena's chest tightened. What happened? The records are incomplete, but what we pieced together suggests they managed 3 successful temporal displacements. Small objects sent backward and forward in time. Then they attempted something larger. A human test subject. The displacement worked, but something went wrong. The subject was sent back much further than intended, and when they tried to retrieve them, the entire facility experienced a catastrophic failure. 17 people died. The project was immediately classified at the highest levels and officially never existed. Elena's mind reeled. But if the facility was destroyed, how did anyone survive to use the technology again? According to these records, 1 person survived the disaster. The project lead. Your great-grandfather. The Empress pulled up another display, this one showing what looked like a crude photograph from Earth's early digital era. A man in a laboratory coat, his face serious, his eyes holding a familiar intensity. Elena recognized those eyes. She'd seen them in her own reflection. Richard Corvash survived, the Empress said quietly. But he was changed. The records suggest he'd been exposed to something during the disaster. Temporal radiation, perhaps. Quantum entanglement with nonlinear time. The medical reports are vague, but they indicate his genetic structure had been altered at a fundamental level. And you think this alteration was passed down? Elena felt like she was grasping at impossible threats. That I somehow inherited the ability to travel through time? Not exactly. The Empress returned to her seat, and the displays faded back into the wall. Among my people, there's a phenomenon we call temporal resonance. Certain individuals can perceive echoes of themselves across time. Past and future versions overlapping with the present. It's rare, maybe 1 in a million Zephyrians, and it requires specific genetic markers combined with exposure to certain temporal conditions. She looked at Elena with an expression that was difficult to read. What if the disaster that destroyed the Corvash Initiative didn't just alter your great-grandfather's genetics? What if it created a temporal echo? A version of his consciousness, his genetic pattern, displaced across time in ways that manifested in his descendants. Elena shook her head. That sounds like science fiction, Your Majesty. So does faster-than-light travel, yet here we are light years from your homeworld. The Empress smiled slightly. Captain, I have lived for 5 centuries. I have seen things that would seem like impossible magic to younger species. I have learned that reality is far stranger and more complex than any of us fully understand. She stood and walked closer to Elena, moving with deliberate slowness as if approaching something fragile. When I was trapped under that rubble, dying, I remember the face of the person who saved me. I couldn't see it clearly because of their protective suit, but I remember their eyes through the helmet visor. Human eyes. And I remember thinking, even through the pain and fear, that those eyes looked ancient. Like they contained lifetimes of memory compressed into a single moment. The Empress reached out and gently took Elena's hand. The contact sent that same electric jolt through Elena's system, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Images maybe. Sensations. The feeling of crushing weight and choking smoke. The terror of knowing death was seconds away. And then, impossibly, a memory that wasn't hers. She was wearing a suit she didn't recognize. The technology was human but decades beyond anything currently available. She was pulling someone from debris, a young Zephyrian who radiated fear and determination in equal measure. She was speaking, though she couldn't hear the words, telling the young Empress that everything would be all right, that she would survive this, that her people needed her. The vision faded, leaving Elena gasping. The Empress released her hand and stepped back, her own breathing unsteady. "You saw it," Valuria said. "The memory. My memory. But also yours somehow." Elena's hands were shaking. "That's impossible. I wasn't there. I wasn't born yet. A version of you was there." The Empress moved to a cabinet that opened at her approach, revealing what looked like ancient artifacts preserved under some kind of stasis field. She removed one carefully, a small piece of metal that looked like it had been through a fire. This was found in the ruins of the palace. It took us 3 centuries to identify what it was. A fragment of environmental suit technology. Not Zephyrian. Not any species we knew at the time. She handed it to Elena. 5 years ago, after humanity joined the Galactic Council, one of my researchers recognized the metallurgic signature. It's human. Advanced human technology at least 50 years beyond what your species currently possesses. But the radioactive decay dating puts its creation at approximately 500 years ago. Elena turned the metal fragment over in her hands. It was lightweight, incredibly strong, and covered in markings that were almost recognizable but not quite. Like looking at an ancestor of current human engineering. "Someone from humanity's future traveled to my past," the Empress said softly. "They saved my life. They changed the course of Zephyrian history because without me the succession crisis would have torn my empire apart. And then they vanished, leaving only questions and this single piece of evidence. But why would my great-grandfather's temporal echo or whatever it was manifest as me? Why not as him? Because temporal genetics don't work linearly." The Empress returned to her seat. "Your great-grandfather was the source, but the echo propagates through his bloodline in unpredictable ways. It might skip generations, manifest differently in each descendant, or not appear at all. In you, it appears to have created something unique. Not time travel in the conventional sense, but a kind of temporal displacement of consciousness." Elena felt like her entire understanding of reality was crumbling. "Are you saying that some version of me, some future version or alternate version, actually did travel back and save you?" "I'm saying that the boundaries between past, present, and future might be more fluid than we understand. That consciousness might not be bound to linear time the way we think it is. That the you sitting here now might carry within your genetic code the memories and experiences of versions of yourself that exist in other times." The Empress leaned forward. "Tell me, Captain, have you ever experienced dreams that felt more like memories? Moments where you knew things you shouldn't know? Déjà vu so strong it felt like living the same moment twice." Elena thought about all the time she'd navigated through dangerous situations with an instinct that defied explanation. The time she'd avoided a pirate ambush by taking a route that made no logical sense but felt absolutely right. The moment she talked her way out of a conflict with Torgathy merchants by using negotiating tactics she'd never learned but somehow knew would work. The dreams of places she'd never been, speaking languages she'd never studied, living lives that weren't hers. "Yes," she whispered. "All my life. I thought I was just intuitive. Good at reading situations. Or you were accessing memories from other versions of yourself. Past versions. Future versions. Versions that exist in probability spaces we don't fully understand." The Empress's voice was gentle. "The Corvash initiative may have failed as a practical technology, but it succeeded in creating something unprecedented. A human bloodline with temporal resonance. And you, Captain, appear to be the strongest manifestation of that legacy." Elena stood abruptly, needing to move, to process. She walked to the window and looked out at the station, at the ships coming and going, at the vast expanse of space beyond. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago, but her entire understanding of her own existence had been fundamentally altered. If this is true, she said slowly, if I somehow saved you 500 years ago or will save you or did save you in some alternate timeline, what does that mean for now? For this moment. It means we're connected across time in ways neither of us fully understands. The Empress joined her at the window. It means that your presence here today was not coincidence. The virus that incapacitated your diplomatic corps, that forced you to stand in as humanity's representative, perhaps that was fate or destiny or whatever we choose to call the forces that guide temporal convergence. You think the universe wanted us to meet? I think time itself has been trying to close a loop that's been open for 500 years. Valuria looked out at the stars with eyes that had seen centuries of their movement. I have spent my entire reign wondering about the person who saved me. Building monuments to the unknown savior. Writing philosophical treatises about the nature of gratitude and debt to someone you can never repay. And now you appear, carrying their echo, maybe carrying their actual consciousness in some form we don't understand. She turned to Elena. But there's something else. Something I didn't mention in the throne room because I needed to understand it better first. What? The temporal distortions haven't stopped. The Empress pulled up another display, this one showing what looked like scientific sensor data. For the past 30 years, my scientists have been detecting increased temporal instability throughout this sector. Small at first, barely measurable. But growing. Time is becoming unstable, Captain. The boundaries between past, present, and future are weakening. Elena stared at the data, her limited understanding of temporal physics struggling to interpret what she was seeing. What causes that? We're not certain, but our best theory is that the Corvash Initiative's disaster created more than just a temporal echo in your bloodline. It may have created a genuine rupture in spacetime. A wound that's been slowly festering for 5 centuries. And now it's reaching a critical point. The Empress's expression was grave. In approximately 6 months, our projections suggest the temporal instability will reach cascade failure. When that happens, linear time in this entire sector will collapse. Past, present, and future will exist simultaneously. Billions of beings will experience temporal dissolution. Consciousness scattered across time. Entire civilizations lost in temporal paradox. Elena felt her knees go weak. 6 months? And you're only mentioning this now. Because until you walked into my throne room, I had no solution. Valuria turned to face her directly. Captain, the reason I recognized you, the reason I felt that resonance is because you're the key. Your temporal genetics, your connection to the original disaster, your existence as a living bridge between past and future. You might be the only being in the galaxy capable of repairing the temporal rupture. I'm a cargo pilot. Elena's voice came out louder than intended. I barely understand what you're telling me. How am I supposed to fix a rupture in spacetime? Not alone. The Empress placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, that same electric connection flowing between them. But with me. With my 5 centuries of experience and knowledge. With my resources and my empire's best scientists. Together, we might be able to do what neither of us could accomplish separately. She smiled, and it transformed her face into something warm and almost human. You saved my life 500 years ago, Captain Corvash. Perhaps now we can save the galaxy together. The universe brought us together across time for a reason. I don't believe in coincidence anymore, not after 5 centuries of searching for answers. Elena looked into those galactic eyes and felt the certainty in her chest grow stronger. This was why she was here. This was what that impossible memory had been preparing her for. Not just a diplomatic mission but something far more significant. A meeting across time that had been inevitable since the moment the Corvash Initiative had failed and scattered pieces of her great-grandfather's consciousness across centuries. I have so many questions, Elena said. I have 500 years worth of answers. Valuria smiled. Or at least, questions of my own. We'll figure this out together. The other delegates, the ceremony, all of that. Can wait. This is more important than trade agreements or diplomatic protocols. The Empress moved toward the door. I'm going to call in my best temporal physicists. We'll need your medical records, your genetic profile, everything we can learn about your family history. And we'll need to access whatever remains of the Corvash Initiative's research. She paused at the door, looking back at Elena. This won't be easy. Confronting temporal ruptures, diving into your own genetic memories, potentially experiencing versions of yourself that exist in other times. Are you prepared for that? Elena thought about all the times in her life when she'd felt like she was living someone else's memories. All the inexplicable knowledge, the impossible instincts, the dreams that felt more real than waking life. Maybe she'd been preparing for this her entire existence without knowing it. "I'm a cargo pilot," she said, managing a slight smile. "We specialize in delivering things to places everyone says are impossible to reach. If fixing space-time is just another impossible delivery, then I'm your woman." Valuria laughed, a sound like crystal bells that seemed to make the very air vibrate. 500 years I've waited for this moment. 500 years of wondering who saved me and why. And now I discover it was a cargo pilot with a sense of humor and a genetic legacy she didn't know she carried. She opened the door, where Sentinel Theron and the ancient advisor were waiting with expressions of barely controlled anxiety. "Theron, I need you to assemble the Temporal Research Council immediately. Priority Alpha authorization. And get me every piece of information Earth has on the Corvash initiative. Use my personal diplomatic channels. This is now a matter of galactic security." To her advisor she said, "Cancel all ceremonies for the next month. Reassign the delegates. Tell them the Empress has urgent matters that take precedence over trade negotiations." The old Zephyrian looked like he wanted to protest, but one glance at Valuria's expression silenced him. He bowed and hurried off to carry out her orders. The Empress turned back to Elena. "Welcome to the most important mission of your life, Captain Corvash. You saved me once before, 500 years ago. Now let's save everyone else." Elena followed her out of the chamber, her mind still reeling but her purpose clear. She'd woken up this morning as a simple cargo pilot, annoyed about a scheduled delay. Now she was standing at the center of a temporal mystery that connected her to events centuries before her birth, to an empress who'd been saved by an impossible savior, to a rupture in spacetime that threatened billions of lives. Her great-grandfather had tried to master time and failed catastrophically. But maybe, just maybe, his legacy through Elena could succeed where he had failed. Not by controlling time but by healing it. By closing loops that had been open for centuries. By bringing together past and future in a present moment that could change everything. As they walked through corridors of crystallized light toward a future that suddenly felt both terrifying and inevitable, Elena felt that certainty in her chest grow into something like hope. She didn't understand how she would do this. She didn't have the knowledge or training or preparation. But she had something more important. She had a connection across time to a moment of desperate heroism. She had genetic memories of saving a life when logic said it was impossible. She had an empress who had spent 5 centuries waiting for this reunion without knowing who she was waiting for. And she had 6 months to prevent the temporal collapse of an entire sector of space. For a cargo pilot who specialized in impossible deliveries, it was just another job. Albeit the most important one she'd ever undertaken. Behind her, through windows that looked out at the stars, the universe continued its ancient dance. Time flowed forward as it always had, mostly. But somewhere in the quantum foam of spacetime, past and future were meeting in the present. And in that meeting point stood a human cargo pilot and a Zephyrian empress, connected by an impossible event and united by a mission that would test the very boundaries of temporal reality. The echo across time had finally found its source. Now they just had to prevent it from destroying everything. 6 months, Elena thought. 6 months to save the galaxy. No pressure. But as she walked beside Empress Valuria toward a future that suddenly held both terror and possibility, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, though there was certainly some of that. Not confusion, though plenty remained. She felt ready. The temporal echo in her blood, the genetic legacy of her great-grandfather's catastrophic experiment, the memories of a version of herself that had saved an empress 5 centuries ago, all of it had been preparing her for this exact moment. Time was a circle, she realized. Or maybe a spiral. But either way, she was exactly where she needed to be. And this time she wouldn't just save one life. She would save them all.